welcome back. And we are moving into our first conversation this morning. As once again, our focus is on the Belize, Guatemala issue. We know that everybody continues to talk about it. They continue to ask questions. And this morning, we get to have the perspective of Ambassador David Gibson, who is here in studio with us. Good morning.
Good morning.
Of course, Ambassador, your history with this issue extends way back. You served as permanent secretary for 22 years, CEO in foreign affairs, and also a part of the negotiating team as well.
That's right.
So quite a lot of history that you can bring out this morning. But thank you for being here.
My great pleasure.
Now, I was asking you before we went on air, and I think one of the things that we can establish is that while there is great interest in this issue at this time, there is a mixture of people who understand the history and people who still have a lot of lingering questions. From what you have seen in the discourse, what is perhaps the one point that you find that people are really just getting wrong about this issue?
I don't think it's so much wrong. It's an absence of information that exists, and a level of there's a certain level of misinformation, and people draw conclusions based on what's available. And I would say that I know that through the very capable Ambassador Stuart Leslie, an attempt has been made systematically over a number of years to conduct a public awareness program. But when I see, for example, the random sampling exercise that was done by Love FM, which to me the results aren't really speculative, they are indicative of the fact that there is an antipathy, not necessarily based on ignorance, but more on the basis of fear and a lack of confidence in the process. So what has caused that? I think that should be the reason for deep analysis on whosoever is going to carry forward the public education program, to understand why and how then one moves from that to try to get to yes.
One of the messages that has been continuously communicated to the public through Minister Elrington, through the different ambassadors who work with this issue, is that the ICJ is essentially the last resort that we have in being able to put an end to the dispute. What is your perspective on this?
Well, some time ago, when I sensed the depth of this antipathy, I started looking more closely at the options available through the juridical process, particularly and specifically through the ICJ. And that led me to do a comparative analysis of the Guyana-Venezuela process, which has reached a certain point, and our process, where we have actually signed a special agreement to go to the ICJ subject to this referendum. In the case of Guyana-Venezuela, their process involved a recommendation from the Secretary General of the United Nations that he at one point could make that kind of recommendation. We expect to see some problems with that because the Venezuelans will say that they are not subject to the compulsory jurisdiction of the court. In our case, if we get a no vote, then what is the alternative? And I certainly don't subscribe to the idea that this is the end all. If you don't go to adjudication, then what next? And I hear certain people saying, well, we go again. And to my mind...
To referendum.
Yeah. If the people say no, then that is it. I think at this time we should be thinking of what is the alternative. So in the course of doing that analysis, I looked at the advisory jurisdiction of the ICJ, which is, in the case of the actual contentious proceedings, looking at the adjudication side of things, you get a binding judgment from the court. In terms of advisory proceedings and the advisory jurisdiction, you get an opinion, and you can get declarations. And they're non-binding, but my thinking is that in our instance, since the issue centers around the validity of the 1859 Boundary Convention, which we have the descriptions of which we have been enshrined in our Constitution, if we're looking at the validity of that under international treaty law, we are sure, based on the legal assessment, that it is a valid treaty. That is what we should focus upon, and I think that then our diplomatic efforts should focus on moving from a position of that kind of reading, that it is valid, to one where our diplomatic efforts achieves a change in the posture of Guatemala, because if that treaty is declared invalid, Guatemala no longer has a case.
Let me just be very clear
Yeah.
in what I hear you saying,
Yeah.
because this is perhaps the only alternative we have heard versus if there is a no vote and if we don't go to the ICJ.
Yeah.
Your opinion is that we can apply to the ICJ for them to declare the 1859 treaty, which is really the strength of the Belize argument, a valid treaty.
Essentially so.
Okay.
Yeah.
And while that is not binding, it doesn't mean Guatemala must agree.
It's an advisory opinion.
It is enforceable or will be internationally recognized if the ICJ would say, yes, the 1859 Boundary Convention that declared the borders of Belize as they are today is valid.
Yeah.
And would, in some sense, put this issue to an end.
Not directly, but it creates a new setting for it to be resolved. Mm-hmm. What will Guatemala do when it is finally declared that the treaty is invalid? Will it persist with a claim? Can it persist with a claim in a credible way? And so I say it then relies on ourselves, our diplomatic capabilities, our ability to internationalize within the United Nations system to get a change in the Guatemalan position. It seems far-fetched to some people. Some people don't want to hear about it because it seems to be something that detracts from the focus on getting to yes with respect to adjudication. Mm-hmm. But I think it is incumbent on us to look at alternatives that are viable, that are using the legal track.
You have been part of the negotiation team. Has this ever been raised before?
It's not really been discussed within the team. It's been rather treated rather dismissively. So, well, no, it's not giving you that binding thing that we're seeking.
Because it's not binding.
Yeah, right.
By whom has it been treated very dismissively?
Generally, I won't call any names.
Diplomats. Diplomats.
Generally, that's been the response. But I do think that it's worthy of serious review.
What you're
legal
saying,
review.
But what you're saying here is flies in the face of what we've been told. We've been told as the public that we've exhausted every possible remedy.
Except the legal.
And so the court, and going to the ICJ on this question before the referendum, is the only way possible. But you're saying that is not so.
What I'm saying, yes, we've exhausted all the remedies made available through the United Nations Charter, mediation, series of negotiations, facilitation or conciliation, which we had with Ramphal Reichler, and having gotten to the point where we agreed that if negotiation were to fail in a final round, then the OAS Secretary General was authorized to make his recommendation for the matter to be resolved at the legal level. And it's following the hierarchy of steps that one engages in, or states engage in, to try to resolve contentious disputes, or specifically territorial disputes.
And essentially, ICJ would be the last step.
And he recommended ICJ, and of course the ICJ is the judicial arm of the United Nations, so it's all within the United Nations framework. And
with all due respect, it can't make any sense, because if you're saying that's the last step, but if it fails, we go back to doing the same things again, then
I'm
it is not the last step.
I'm not saying...
Not that what you're
so.
saying makes no sense.
No.
My argument is that...
Can you go back to negotiation?
We can go right back to the process again, so it can't be the last step.
Yeah, but in terms of where we are right now, this process, we've reached the high point where...
In the circle.
And bearing in mind the history of failure, will there be a new constellation of people in Guatemala at some point in time who will say, oh boy, time to put this away? We've had that experience with the facilitators' proposals where their foreign minister agreed.
And signed on to it. That's, can we discuss that a little bit further? Because there are two levels that essentially there has to be agreement in Guatemala. One is being able to, well, outside of the ICJ, if we look back on the other processes, meeting as government representatives and coming to some sort of agreement is one thing, but then it has to go to their Congress to be approved.
Yeah.
And that's where we saw the process fail. That's where we had questions about the 13 agreements, but some went through. And even this process to go to the referendum. And that seems to be where you can't really have a guarantee that anything that is agreed upon will be ratified by Congress.
Well, this advisory opinion, ideally you would want the participation of Guatemala. If it doesn't happen, then it is for us to maneuver it within the United Nations to the point of getting it, because it can only happen within the United Nations. Only the United Nations can ask a legal question of the International Court of Justice in a situation like this for an advisory opinion. So it's necessary then to
still have their agreement. Can I ask one question? Because I think one of the things that the public is really, they seem to be grappling with is a bit of a change in opinion by some key participants in this issue. I was able to interview the former Foreign Minister, Lisa Shulman, and she spoke of still being confident in the ICJ process as a way to resolve this issue, but not agreeing to a yes vote at this time because of the behavior of Guatemala. Now, I want to pose the very same question to you because you have been a part of the negotiating process that has led us to the special agreement that was signed in 2008. Are you still confident that the ICJ is the best way forward for us to settle this dispute?
I think so, but I need to refer to her observations because what she has listed as points of concern, things that need to happen, are really, in my assessment, what are internal confidence building activities to restore confidence, because I would say that there has been a tremendous falling away of public confidence in the management of the process, in the conduct of our diplomatic affairs.
Do you think we are too soft on the issues that we have seen happening with Guatemala, from Chiquibul incursions and especially the continuous challenges in the Sarstoon?
It's not so much a matter of being soft as being smart. And when I say that, I listen to the soft diplomacy. Soft diplomacy, if you can conduct soft diplomacy, it means that you must have some kind of hard thing that you can fall back on. In fact, diplomacy has been our key area of strength. I think that there have been diplomatic errors with respect to the management of the Sarstoon situation, which has impacted on public confidence, has created a sense of national humiliation that has not been remedied as yet. Can it be rectified? How can it be rectified? For me, as far as the Sarstoon is concerned, it has got to be, protocol or not, a return to the status quo ante, where our traditional rights on the river are respected by the Guatemalans. The Guatemalans have got to show and not be paying lip service to these binational agreements and so on, which really were being negotiated at the time, precisely the time we are negotiating these agreements. They are making a move on the Sarstoon. What is that? What is that saying to you? How should that have been interpreted? For me, I would have said to them, look, and to the OAS Secretary General, we stop here and let us deal with that Sarstoon.
Can I follow up with that? Former Foreign Minister and now Senator Eamon Courtney has called what is taking place in the Sarstoon an annexation. Do you agree with that?
An annexation means that you have, in effect, permanently acquired an area. What I hear the Guatemalans saying is that they have asserted control. They control the area. In effect, what they've done is created a similar temporal situation that exists with the western boundary. They've simply extended it to the Sarstoon, creating uncertainty and instability. And in so doing, you have to look at what were the diplomatic and political objectives there. And certainly the diplomatic objective seems to have been to try to impress on Belizean people that you have to resolve this, you have to go to court. It's part of that's the stick part of the carrot that was being put out with bilateral negotiations, the negotiation of these bilateral agreements.
Where we are right now, as a yes vote seems to be where the administration bipartisanly wants to go. Mm-hmm. Whether they say yes immediately or they say yes contingent on XYZ. Mm-hmm. I hear you saying that there has been mismanagement, which has caused a lack of public confidence.
Yeah.
Would a change in political directorate assist in that change along with the other things that need to be changed?
I am happy to see that yesterday the Prime Minister met with the leader of the opposition. And we hear that this matter of preparing for the ICJ will go to the national executives. I think that's quite practical, bearing in mind that in both political parties there are divisions, there are strong voices going both ways. I've seen where, again, Lisa Schumann talks about a non-partisan approach and something which involves everybody, the yes and the no's. So that seems to be dynamic enough for me. Now, certainly as we approach elections again in 2020, that is going to be, I have no doubt, is going to be an influencing factor. Can some kind of understanding be reached which transcends that and says, look, for this purpose.
Well, some political pundits say the referendum will not happen before the election.
Well, perhaps you can tell. What to think that you should be driven by what the international community is saying, well, you better do this thing and money was short for our GSNC's own office and so on. No. You have got to have a good gauge of what people are thinking.
We posed that question to Ambassador Rosado, and I believe he was saying there isn't pressure from the international community.
Right, but I'm hearing otherwise from other quarters, so it's a question of which is credible.
Yeah.
But in the interim, can I just push my question a little bit more? Mm-hmm. In the interim, some shuffling of faces, some shuffling of management personnel, the foreign minister, wouldn't that help in terms of stemming back the tide away from this lack of public confidence? And that's something we can control. At least the Prime Minister can control it.
Is that your view? Do you think that that is a possibility? You're asking for my view?
I'm asking for your view. My view is public.
Yeah, right. I think that there's a need for a change of approach, fundamentally.
Same person, just different approach.
He's a foreign minister. He's not a opaque person. But there's a need, and that's why I think what has happened over the past 2 weeks is important, that you get a sense of what people are thinking now that it has gone to another level with the referendum in Guatemala, where our experience is likely to be the opposite, a high turnout with a no, a high voter turnout with a no. So these things need to be really seriously considered. Who will do it? Is it going to be the same old? Yeah. Is it going to be a broader, synergetic group of thinkers? Because that's another problem that I've observed, that there's been quite a bit of fragmentation of the group that has, over a period of time, looked at this thing in a systematic way, that really did well in terms of negotiating the special agreement and that sort of thing. It has gone. Can it be brought back? I think so. And it can be done in the way it used to be done, which is bipartisan, where you got the best minds coming forward to strategize and look at how you will move. And the key element of things right now would be, of course, raising the level of public consciousness and awareness. Yeah.
Before we move that, because we
I
want to
avoided your
talk.
question, actually.
Sorry?
I avoided your
I
question.
know, I realize, but diplomats, that's what we do.
I have my view.
Well, what I'm hearing you say is that no matter who is in the post of foreign minister, if we change our approach
Yeah.
in tackling the issues that are ongoing at this time, you feel that there can be a bit more public confidence
Yes.
in the process.
Yeah.
Now, let's shift gears for a bit and move to the other side of our border and pay attention to what happened in the Guatemalan referendum.
Yeah.
And, I have to be very clear. We cannot say it's not a legitimate referendum. It is based on their
Certainly,
laws.
certainly
If it
is,
was
yeah.
5 people voting, it was legitimate.
Right.
But the voter turnout was low.
Yeah.
What is your perspective on what that means from the Guatemalan side?
I think that could have been a no vote. As a matter of fact, I thought that it would have been an occasion to really vent spleen on the corruption of the current administration. But people stayed away. I listened to some of the interviews. I think it was Channel 5 that did it in Flores. And these are very practical people who say, well, this is going to be destabilizing for us. As a matter of fact, as a result of the it's a question of what people understood to be the purpose of the referendum, because I am aware, certainly last week, that there are elements in some of the Guatemalan communities who think that the yes vote is saying, you got it, go ahead. And so some kind of restraints have had to be exercised to stop any kind of sudden increase in incursions. I don't know who's doing it. I know some of the NGOs were involved in trying to keep people cool.
It was interesting when we looked at, I was trying to find the numbers, but I don't have them here. The results of the referendum showed one of the things that I think many people had assumed before, which was that Guatemala City specifically would have the highest voter turnout. And they were somewhere, if not around 35 or higher, 35%, which is the highest that I had found in the different departments. Petén was around average, and some of the other departments nearer to our border had lower turnouts. What does it mean that the capital, the most populated area, was, and I think they were 98%. I have to go back and check, but I'm pretty sure that's what I recall. That they were so, it's not a 50%, but nearing 40 is pretty good for their referendum turnout in Guatemala City. What does that say?
Well, it's a question of, again, the analysis of who are the people voting. I saw quite a few older heads, quite a few young people, differently motivated.
Yeah.
But all with some understanding that there is a claim that needs to be dealt with. It's not as people are saying, well, let's do this thing and get rid of it, and because we have other fish to fry and we have other bigger things. I'm also hearing that kind of comment from some of the yes votes here. Let's get it over with. Let's vote and get it over with, without any sense of what's involved, what are the possible implications, and so on. It's just people are wary of dealing with it.
We also hear people say, listen, this is just too much of a gamble for us.
Yeah.
Guatemala has nothing to lose.
No, that's definitely a major concern. As a matter of fact, some of that no vote is really a perception of people who are saying, I will vote no to preserve our sovereignty. That is why I will vote no. I don't think that our borders that we know were already delimited by treaty and demarcated partially should be put to a court to be determined. And a lot has to do with how that question has been phrased. You will see there's been quite a bit of to and fro on that question, the way it was phrased. Although it's a legally framed question, people are saying, well, we are asking this court to determine what we know is ours. And the argument is reduced to that.
The discussion has been that, which ironically, I visited the office in Belmopan to pick up some material, and I got 6 very helpful pamphlets. None of them had anything negative to say about us going to the ICJ. It was all positive material, which is disheartening to me. But this education campaign, how do you feel it will play out, particularly, and I'm asking specifically, because after all the information comes out, there's information fatigue. And when you have information fatigue, you fall back on what your most emotional reference point was. So it sort of undoes itself.
Yeah.
Do you think that we're capable as a country, culturally, to get to the point of a logical, thought-out vote? Or do you think we'll always fall back to what are emotional? You describe it as fear, I describe it as emotion, because it could be patriotism, as you said, it could be.
Yeah, sure.
Do you think that it's even possible, by having an education campaign, to get to a logical assessment of how we should vote?
I don't eliminate the possibility. I think that if it is well done, it certainly could help to increase the level of awareness. But I have seen people who fully understand the arguments,
Fall back to that
who have said, I don't care, I'm not going to vote. Yes.
It was a great idea till it became real.
So, that's real out there.
You've said in other media interviews you expect that Belizeans will vote no.
Yes, at this time, that's my sense of it. And so what I'm hearing now is corroborating that. But I've been involved in, for quite as a matter of fact, when the special agreement was signed in 2008, there was a higher level of positivity.
Confidence.
And confidence. Confidence is critical. Yeah, because once that is eroded, everything falls away.
Well, that brings me to another point. Do you believe that if we had maintained the original agreement of a simultaneous referenda in October 2013, that this process perhaps had more likelihood of being successful?
Well, that's in a sense, hindsight is saying to me, no. No, this is probably better because of the practicalities of the polities and how they work, or how Guatemala works. They had to find a time, they wanted to hinge it on some other referendum issue and so on, and they had their own convoluted dynamics of getting to where they got. Yeah.
In terms of the way that we're looking at this thing, we're looking at resolving Guatemala issue linearly. We've done this, then we've done that, then we've done this, then we've done that, and we're now at the end of that process. But I don't know if you agree with me that it's more circular. We go through this, we go through that. If it doesn't work, then we come back to that and we go back around again.
Meaning, at some point in time, come back to a referendum.
Come back to, not only come back to a referendum.
Go back to negotiations?
Go back to negotiations, go back to going through all of the recommendations to see if we can do it again.
Well, if you go back to negotiation, to negotiate what? Because it is not for lack of trying. If you look at what the bottom lines are, we are saying we're not yielding on any territory, and they are persisting in a territorial claim. That's where it is. These are irreconcilable differences.
But the option that you have put on the table, which is to go to the court
for the advisory jurisdiction,
for the advisory jurisdiction, that is going back to the circle, because if and when you get that preliminary point settled by the court, then you have to go back in. Your suggestion is that creates a new opportunity for the negotiators to say, listen,
but that's
I have a stronger...
That's at another level, and it is a question of what's to be negotiated. As a matter of fact, you're not going to be negotiating much.
Understood, but you will be negotiating.
You'll probably be negotiating on the ground as to why the line should be cut, kind of thing.
Yes, but it's negotiation, just a different kind.
Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah, that is always there.
Correct.
Yeah.
So it is circular.
But it's not to go and repeat history.
No.
And bring in new faces.
No.
Because
my question was,
what we see is a regeneration of this posture in that narrow political economic elite and the military elite in Guatemala. They're regenerating themselves. They are the power elite, and they are regenerating themselves. We know where that's happening from, what law faculty and so on. It's a holy grail for these people.
Well, my question was in terms of getting ourselves, let's say that overnight the directorate, the diplomatic and political directorate decide, you know what Mr. Gibson is saying makes sense. You should probably try that. but we have a no vote first. Wouldn't we look like we're forum shopping?
Well,
we already had an option to go to the court, and we're now trying to cherry pick how we go there to get a strategic advantage.
You see, that's why if you're looking at what is a continuum, it's a question, if you get a no vote, what next?
Yeah.
What next? Are we going to wait around and say, well, boy, let's move this thing and so we can get another referendum going? I think that's quite unreal. I think when these people say no, as I expect that they will, then it is no. You can't come back with that because unless you come back in such a way as if you're going to be trying to buy votes and so on. And it's one issue.
You can't buy Belizean votes on that one.
Yeah, you can't.
Can't.
Yeah.
Wasting your money.
Yeah. So this thing about a circle, for me, it is not a circle. Because if it is a circle, I suppose it depends on the angle where the circle is it going up or is it horizontal?
Is it reaching the end of the road
yeah.
and deciding to clear a new path?
I think you're putting yourself at another level to continue the process of trying to find a solution. Yeah. You've got to be organized for it. You've got to be strong. You have to look at history, the lessons learned from the internationalization for independence. And so yeah.
You spoke about, quite expectedly, a regeneration in Guatemala.
Yeah.
In Belize, it appears to me that there's a degeneration of the mines. With all due respect to the persons who have had control of it since Belize had canals that we could swim in.
You weren't wrong for that.
I was not wrong. Exactly my point. Exactly my point.
Yeah.
There doesn't seem to be a regeneration on our side. Everybody seems to be dead, above 50, or some way disconnected with it for other reasons.
I would disagree with that. I happen to do a program at the University of Belize, History of Belize Guatemalan Relations, and I know that there are young minds that are coming up that are seized of what is going on. Don't have the experience, but will get it. But what is lacking is...
Connected to the process?
Yeah, coordination.
Wow.
And a lack of synergizing, I call it, bringing the minds together.
Who are those persons? Those persons probably around 30 to 40 who are engaged, as you said, these young people who are going to take over from Assad Truman, who are going to take over from Lisa Truman, who are going to take over from David Gibson. Who are these young people?
Not many.
I can't identify them either.
But the talent spotting has been happening, I can tell you. And so there are people who we know of, who we are trying to encourage. As a matter of fact, I was hoping that you would be one of them.
Me?
Yes.
So what I'm doing
I listened to you 2 weeks ago, or was it a week ago?
When the referendum.
And I found that your questions were quite incisive and indicative of some research and so on. Mm-hmm. And that is so important.
Wow.
Now, and that's...
You're trying to disarm me.
No, I don't think so.
You're good.
I don't think so, but I do say this much because it leads me to the question: is this process? Let me go back. Should the road to the referendum, the education process to the referendum, be a campaign for Belizeans to vote yes, or should it be a campaign for Belizeans to vote?
For me, it is for Belizeans to vote. I'm not going to regurgitate what I'm hearing because I don't believe there's sincerity when I hear it. Obviously, the underlying thing is to get to yes. But if you're going to put information out there, then you've got to listen to everybody. Mm-hmm. You've got to listen to the BPP. They have an analysis. Is it flawed? Is there room for dialogue based on fact and so on? That's the kind of dynamic that needs to be introduced, that they're not just shutting out people because they don't hold your view. And what is your view? You think you have the monopoly on the truth and boy, you better follow. That is not going to work at all. And I've been around and listened, and some of what I hear is like saying, well, Resolution 3520 guaranteed our territorial integrity and sovereignty. So what's this big deal now about this country? Why have we yielded to this country? Why have we established an agreement on confidence-building measures that it now gives a temporal nature to our boundary, it seems? The Guatemalans thought they won a diplomatic victory when they got that to happen. So these things have got to be explained in their historical context. And their analysis and perspective must be respected because it's reduced to some fundamentals, which is lacking in the mechanics of how you deal with the situation. And I think that should be the role of the educations, to build capacity to analyze as we go along.
From the Belize side, when we look at this situation as an outsider not involved in the process, it almost feels like we decided to take a road, realized on that road that perhaps it wasn't the best choice, and we're just so far, we're trying to get to the end.
I don't think that's been realized.
You don't think it's been realized? But do you share this analysis?
At the same time, if you're on that road, well,
I mean, can we turn back? Can we divert? Can we cut a new path?
With the exactitude of hindsight, perhaps things could have been done differently.
Hindsight is 20/20. That's what they normally say.
That's why I said with the exactitude of hindsight. Because certainly there are certain key people who were saying, look, at the time of the Guatemalan aggression in 1999, when they held our soldiers, when they wanted to make the point that there's no border, when they were putting in these villages, deliberately placing villages in Belize, there was a view that came from Professor Edward Ling, which is saying, born in the United Nations, stay in the United Nations, deal with the United Nations Security Council to resolve this matter. We went the track of the Organization of American States, which is an agency of the United Nations, but certainly not with the teeth
Same authority
and authority that the United Nations Security Council has. So, you know, that's of course hindsight and so on, and who was in power at the time, who was imbued with things Ibero-American and was influenced by that. These are, you know, you can start pointing fingers, but for purposes of evaluating, understanding the history, it's important to know what those dynamics were at the time that put us here.
Yeah. And you know, you're right, but my question really is, with the gift of the vision of hindsight, is it really that we have to follow through to the end of this process, or do we need to perhaps pause, analyze what the people of Belize are saying, take into consideration what is coming out of Guatemala, and decide if we really want to finish this road or find an alternative?
Yeah, well, if we're following the UN process, which we have done, and I think it's important to look at that because we can use that to our advantage. Here we are at this level. What alternative are we talking about? How is that proceeded with? Who will make the difference there? As against, if you're on a legal track, have you exhausted the legal options that are available, the legal remedies that are possibly available? So there we are.
All right, I don't want to lose the opportunity. We're so happy to have you here, and I said you have a wealth of experience. One of the things I think people really want to understand, and really is one of the most disturbing images we're left with, is the map of the claim. We'll get it up right now so we can see.
Yeah.
And the claim by Guatemala has changed over time.
Yes.
And now we are back to the half of Belize, from the Sabun to the Sarstoon. Let's talk
a bit
about
more than half. Yeah.
Talk to us about
4,909 square miles out of 8,776. So, yeah.
Talk to us about the current claim that they have now.
Well, that claim was first expressed in 1999 when Foreign Minister Stein wrote Said Musa to say, look, this matter should go legal, and here is what we're claiming. We're claiming, not to the exclusion of the rest of the country, but we're claiming the Sabun to the Sarstoon, all the keys except St. George's Key, because that was won by Belize in 1798. So that's the extent of the claim. And of course the maritime areas related thereto. Yeah.
What's your view on the turning back of the Maritime Areas Act? There was a call by the opposition that it should be repealed. What is your position?
I see Lisa mentioning it as well as almost like a precondition for creating this confidence. But for me, looking at the phrasing of it, that is a matter that can be attended to at any time, including in a post-ICJ situation, because it would certainly be rendered redundant then. This proposal that I've seen for the amendment also includes a negotiating clause. The difference is that the current act makes does not preserves our right as far as the United Nations Convention on the Law is concerned, but was put in there for purposes of negotiation. The argument is that the negotiation phase is past, so we should amend the act. For me, that act can be amended at any time. It is not a significant international legal issue that it remains as is at this time. But but for domestic purposes, it is redundant. Yeah.
Tell us, we'll obviously talk about the strength of the Belize case in this issue and the multiple times that Guatemala in some way or form has essentially agreed to the borders that we do have in place. But what is the strength of their case?
There's none. Their case, since you're going strictly legal, you're doing that under the statute of the International Court of Justice, which deals with matters of a legal nature. Is there a valid treaty? In terms of what is called acquisitive prescription, who administered administrative control, effective occupation, over what period of time? It is Belize.
And all of these things are in favor of Belize.
Long ago, they let go uti possidetis, which is this concept that came out after 1821, when the Central American states emerged from the Spanish Empire. Belize pre-existed that. Belize as a geopolitical space pre-existed that uti possidetis. So their arguments, or what they call uti possidetis de facto, is unreal because they never were here, and uti possidetis de jure, unreal because they never exercised jurisdiction over the area. As a matter of fact, the argument could be made that the jurisdiction was exercised by the Yucatan Captains General. In terms of who has the right to self-determination in this area, the people of Belize. We've been here, we've emerged as a nation, we have our own state, machinery, culture, everything is Belizean. So the arguments are there. They're very strong arguments. And I have people talk about litigation risk, and there's no such thing.
Well,
there's a thing called legal risk that I understand.
Yeah.
And it's a question of what is the certainty of the outcome. And I would say that there's a high degree of certainty.
But there's a lack of understanding of how the ICJ works. I don't know fully how the ICJ works. And I think the only reference point that the public has is what happens in our magistrate court or Supreme Court or CCJ.
Which is, again, something that needs to be explained. If you look at the special agreement, it sets out the process, which follows generally the rules and procedure of the ICJ, which is looking at a country puts a memorial. People say, well, there's no disclosure. Well, you put your memorial. It's got to be strictly legal. You can't come in with anything and say, oh, the British strict way. And,
so they can't use that the British didn't complete their part of the agreement.
It doesn't stop them from bringing it in. I can tell you that it could get shredded immediately by the judges and say, well, that is extraneous to the case. We are saying strictly legal. Don't bring it.
Why is it not allowed? Because the British attempted to compensate? Because it, what?
Because it falls under the ex equio element, and even under that, it has been shredded and trashed. That you have, if you had a treaty in 1863, which says, look, here's how we're going to deal with this conjoint construction of this road. Conjoint is the operative word. And both parties failed to do so. Does that impact on the validity of the treaty? Was that the material part of the treaty? It is not. This is a boundary convention which delimits the frontiers between the two countries, the boundaries between the two countries.
So you're saying that there's no litigation risk? There's just a legal risk? And I don't know the difference. I don't know if this is like what the Prime Minister said.
My understanding of litigation risk is that
it's a possibility
you know that you could be sued for something as against a legal risk, where if you have a case, what is the likelihood that you are going to win that case or not?
Litigation risk is something very simple. It means that it's a possibility every time you go to court, that is a possibility that you might lose, for whatever reason. Well, litigation risk, lose the case.
I would argue that point, actually, because I kept hearing people talking about litigation risk. So what I suppose the meaning, they use synonymously with legal risk, where, in fact, if you go to court, there's an element of possibility that you can
Lose.
either win
What
or
about
lose. Yeah.
the perception that people have that this is like King Solomon's court, that if you are ruling on an issue between two independent countries, maybe you just find a middle ground and appease one side.
That is where the ex equo element comes in, as against the legal dimension, which is what the British always insisted upon. Let us look at this as a legal matter. First under the Permanent Court of International Justice, and now under the ICJ. In this section 38.1 is a very powerful section. It's strictly legal. It's strictly that. It's got to be legal in terms of international law. Is it consistent with international conventions and treaties? That's one element. Is it customary, consistent with customary international law, which is looking at historical consolidation, effective occupation, things along that line, administrative control. The lighthouse, the existence of a lighthouse at Lighthouse Reef in 1870 to 21 is indicative of who exercised sovereignty. These are the things that practically will stand up in a court as a legal proof.
Given what you said in the beginning of this conversation, which is if you were to use the current environment as your marker, you expect a high voter turnout from Belize at a referendum with a vote of no.
Yeah.
In your opinion, what will happen if we do not seek the alternative which you're suggesting and there is a no vote? Mm-hmm. What are the potential risks for Belize if we vehemently decide we will not go to the ICJ? There's no other referendum to come. Government doesn't agree with looking at the validation of the 1859 treaty. What will be the risks for Belize?
It would be an act of gross negligence not to look at alternatives, or at least this alternative. Will Guatemala mobilize and do saber rattling? Will increase forces on the Sarstoon? No. Well, if we sit down, and we shouldn't be sitting down now, we have to be ready to deal with any eventuality. In other words, the scenarios of possible outcomes as a result of no vote have got to be contemplated and prepared for. We've got to do that. That's incumbent on us. That's incumbent on our diplomats, on our government, to consider these things. And it is not for anybody to be saying, well, look, it's basically the end of the world. We're going to war. It's nonsense. We've got to take care of our business. And I think that there are quite capable people in our society who can organize around that.
Shifting it back to the very same issue, what do you think can be done to encourage Belizeans to see the strength of the case for Belize in going to the ICJ?
I certainly think that there's an underutilization of the media as a means of communication. A television, systematic program of education via television at appropriate times when people have the time. And not come with any kitchen sink, come with small doses so that but first you have to have a sense of what people are thinking and why and how you deal with them and who deals with it. And it's not a con job that you want to do, you just want to create awareness. And if it is out of that comes a further no, as I've seen happen with people who I think really had it, there's this almost an innate fear of that kind of exposure.
Yeah, it's a monumental task. It's not just educating on a centuries old issue.
Yeah.
It's also appeasing people's fear that this is not something that possesses such a great risk for us. Yeah. And I mean, my question is it even possible?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a question to ponder. I don't think there should be any quick static end of us. We got to be real, and you got to know when to stop and think again and review. That's an imperative now. Yeah.
And can I ask a very undemocratic question? Are we making people, the general public, make a decision which they're not capable of making? Should the leaders in Parliament make this decision and take it away from the need for a referendum? If the leaders are sure, as you were saying, that there's zero risk, this man is a slam dunk case.
Yeah.
I mean, we can send the foreign minister to argue that he will win.
You have doubts about that? Oh, go ahead. Yeah.
But should it be not a referendum vote, but rather than taking the risk, which is going to be a no vote based on what all the
From what we're seeing now.
what we're seeing now?
Yeah.
Shouldn't Parliament go and say, listen, by a 3/4 majority of Parliament, we're going to say either yes or no to the ICJ. If we're wrong, we'll be damned and we'll accept the consequences. If we're right, the people would have known that we made the best decision
And be
for
free
them
of the issue.
and be free of the issue.
Yeah. So,
Do you think that this should not be a referendum vote, but should be a parliamentary vote?
in real terms, looking at the real political situation, it's not going to happen. It can't happen. And more so the case now, people want a say. People want a say in this process. And the fact that that say is tending towards a no doesn't at all detract from the fact that this is a process that has a parliamentary dimension too, because that 3/4 vote that you're talking about, if the people were to say yes, the parliament still has to come up with a 3/4 vote to amend the constitution to enable the court to determine the boundaries, because our boundaries are already there. So, in other words, there are things that need to be put out here now on how they will be handled that have not been said before. This is no simplistic exercise. As you rightly said, it's a complex issue. Very few people understand it. It takes time to understand and research and so on. And so it is incumbent on those who do it to find a way to impart the knowledge in such a way that it is understandable and it is not full of any attempt to con and trick and cajole.
All right. What would you like to tell the Belizean people as our close of the importance of researching and understanding the issue, or important elements they should pay attention to?
Oftentimes I hear people say, oh, but these people need to understand. And that turns me off, because it's like saying, well, boy, you're ignorant. If you only read, you understand. I know to read. And for me, that's absolute nonsense. It's a question of how do you communicate with the Belizean man and woman to get a point across. You've been successful in other areas. Find out what is the formula for this one. It's there. And the fundamental of it is plain communication, history of, and find a way to communicate the history and explain even things like delimitation and demarcation and delineation, which will then lead you to understand that, look, that happened already. It needs to be completed. That's a kind of dynamic process that is putting out information and also receiving concerns being expressed. I think to some extent that was accomplished by Stuart Leslie, Ambassador Leslie. I think he did a creditable program. It's not been recognized, but such is the way of it.
Well, can I go there? Because I think one of the things we've seen is the education campaign predominantly within the school system.
Yeah.
And my question is, and I am very much a youth advocate. I believe our viewers know that.
What's your target? 18-year vote.
But we also know they don't participate in voting. I'm not saying they
won't.
Voters?
How do you target the voters?
Yeah. Has that perhaps been a part of the failure in the education campaign, as it has? I think it's valuable information for the young people.
I've looked at the record of coverage, and there have been over 200 what are called interventions and presentations and meetings and so on. And some of it has, as a matter of fact, as a part of his work, along with Herman Burr, they helped to develop a curriculum for schools. Very well. But that was not the main thrust of what they've done. They've communicated with quite a few targeted groups who are voters, the NTUCB and so on.
Okay.
But it's something, it's not a one-shot thing. You are building layers of understanding as you go along, and that needs to reach some kind of critical mass to be effective. Otherwise, something happens and people get deflected. And the biggest deflector has been the issue of confidence. I could tell you because I've seen it for myself.
Do you share the opinion, as we hear in different quarters, that there is no confidence that even with a binding agreement from the ICJ, that Guatemala will relinquish this claim?
I have no problem with that at all. As a matter of fact, if you look, and I recommend you look at the registry and the records of the court in terms of the fulfillment of and compliance with judgments. And there's some research done where the court has heard about 150 cases already. About 29 of those were contentious territorial issues and maritime issues. And the judgments were given. And all of them have been complied with. And that includes Colombia and Nicaragua. What you get sometimes is a delayed action because the states object, states say and threaten to leave the court, and they will ignore the judgment. The only country that has done that is the United States of America in relation to Nicaragua and the mining of the Corinto Harbor when the court found that the United States was in breach of international law by an act of aggression against a state.
You know what I want to ask?
Yeah.
There's the peripheral belief of Belizeans that we have friends, and that our friends are somewhere on our side. What is the role of the British in what we're doing? Are they active? Are they behind the scenes? Are they advising us? Are they supporting us?
Yeah.
What are the roles, and separately, what are the roles of the Americans who have significant interests over that side of the border and less over this side?
Yeah. Well, in both cases, they have been supportive of the process, of this process. Now,
Both countries to resolve.
No, there was a time, and we had to say something about it, where the British started to assume what they call an even-handed approach to it. Obviously there are some underlying interests, but we are guided by, and we should be guided by, the commitments they are held to under the Referendum 3520, that they should continue to be engaged, and they themselves have said that they will continue to be engaged. And it is no incident that you have a bat sub in Belize when it could be in Borneo. And so on.
That was an agreement that was reached, right?
Yeah, in terms of the transition from a defense mode to a training mode, when you're training your soldiers, you're training them to fight in the theater where they're expected to fight. So almost the entire British Army has been trained in our jungles, in jungle warfare, over a long period of time. I'm not saying that there's going to be any automatic commitment of forces by the British. As a matter of fact, we know that when the Shateras were moving through the forests, the British were there training, and the Shateras walked past them because they said, well, those boys won't do us anything, because that's not the mode that they were in. But as you look at what the British have said in terms of what should happen if the security of Belize were really threatened, because these threats of force that have been exercised on the Sarstoon, threats of force in violation of the agreement on confidence building measures, and that's not been said, but these are violations, and do not constitute any act of hostility that falls outside the framework of what is presently a managed
gunboats in
managed territorial dispute.
With soldiers, not infringement.
It is not an act sufficient to trigger.
How much more do they have to do?
But it is against the confidence building measures.
But it is in violation.
Yeah.
How much more?
And they have not been accused and brought to task on that. Instead, we are trying to resolve things with a protocol.
Can I just?
That's where the soft diplomacy has come in. I know where I want to go.
Guatemalan-American relationship, and we must point out
I was very
concerned.
I was very concerned when Guatemala
joined the U.S. in
on this Jerusalem issue.
Yes.
And then you're seeing changes in the State Department, and people are coming in. Some of the old reactionaries, if I can call them that, And so whereas we've had a strong link and good support in the State Department, we have to look very closely at that. The tendency has been to be one where there's been balance in the relationship with the United States of America. There could be a situation where that changes, and especially if you want to get the United Nations to do something that they don't agree with. Like, for example, you want to go from advisory opinion and it were to go into the United Nations Security Council where the US has a veto. You'd have a problem. The Ghanaians are in a bit better position. ExxonMobil is there. But, and that is why I say if we do anything, it has got to be in the United Nations General Assembly where a Security Council veto can be overridden by a 2/3 majority vote. That's where the internationalization has got to focus if we're going to go there.
Well, we thank you for the wealth of information that you've offered us this morning. We really appreciate you coming in for this conversation this morning.
It's my pleasure.
All right.
It's my pleasure. And like I said,
yes.
Have you read the legal opinion?
Yes.
Very good. Yeah. So that's you have a good sense of things, huh? Yeah.
Thank you very much. We're going to go ahead and take a break, and when we come back, we'll be talking about World Intellectual Property Day. So stay tuned.
Very good.